Hello, the program that you're about to see is called The Future from the Past, and you will see two video stories, which cover a bit different but still regional infrastructural developments. So one story is about the University Cosmic Observatory, which was founded in the late 18th century by Jesuits, and then it became part of the Imperial Austro-Hungarian educational infrastructure, but also the infrastructure of power and military that was built in this region, which became Austrian in the late 18th century. And then the second story continues with the Soviet Empire. So let's say the Austrian Empire collapsed during the First World War, and then there was a short period of the Polish interwar state, and then the Soviet Union captured this region. It became part of another empire, the Socialist Empire. These two stories, they of course connected to two big empires. One was Austro-Hungarian Empire, which strived to establish astronomic observatory on these eastern peripheries, not just because of curiosity or academic research, but also because of the need to control the population and to observe. So this important research as observing. Then the Soviet Empire also built this infrastructure not just for the purposes of academic research, but also partly for the means of controlling these lands and these people. So we have this combination of imperial imagination, this extensive view from these imperial managers, let's say, but it's also, these are stories about what happens when empires collapse, and then how this vision and this outer vision and this desire to research extensively what is surrounding our planet kind of collapses into very peripheral thinking. This is not just the peripheral, the local story, it's more a global story, part of what we live now, part of the current development. And this is the guy, Joseph Lizganik, who established the astronomic school here in Lviv, in Lemberg. Besides maintaining lands and territories, Lizganik observed a lot.
We're about to talk about the Lviv Observatory. Actually, that was and still is the smallest observatory in Ukraine. Here, a lot of the materials about very early astronomical observations, starting even from 17th century. The observatory was established as a separate specialized building in the middle of May of 1771. This early observatory, which was built upon the Jesuits' gate around the Jesuits' church. And actually, this all early story of astronomical observatory, as for Vienna, as for Vilnius, all these were connected to the Jesuits. Since Jesuits have the best dispersed network of observers over the whole globe. Another stage of history is about the coming of Austria, in those times the Empire of Habsburgs, and one of the first things which were done on these territories, new coming territories, which were considered like belonging to the empire by law, actually, is to make maps. Here was commanded such prominent figure Joseph Lizganik, also former Jesuit, and he was the personal geodesist and astronomer of Imperatrice. And his task was to make maps, both for, let's say, economic reasons and for, like, say, improving the governing. And he was the next figure by governor. Я от пильовим цілими сходами, я постійно не можу вверх, не щоб не сходити. Тому стройний. Так. 19th century, it became clear the place of Lviv in Austro-Hungarian Empire. That actually it's going to be an important province, or let's say center of, let's say, economical, scientific, whatever. And in this time, actually, the university was in decline. And in this time, Austrian, let's say, government decided to move the focus to the more applied aspects and, let's say, military aspects of geodesy and astronomy. In the middle of war, under the Germany occupations, here the observatory actually was closed as university, and most of the collaborators were surviving, and this is Evgeny Shrimka, who was director of observatory. He managed to go to the railway station, and he, by bribery, he got this like ticket that he sent this equipment to the Reich. And he productively worked many years, and still on my memory I was taking picture of comets and other objects by this device, for example. A small excursion back to the, let's say, post-war episodes. This building, it calls mezzanine, this architectural form, it's called mezzanine. That's a special, like, building to have the level the site to make some observation. It was designed for specifically for meteorological observation, but quickly went under the rule of our observer. Even at the beginning of 1957, let's say, a lot ahead of the launching the first satellite of Earth, yeah, the Soviet Union decided to create a large, let's say, network of observational sites to observe this actually satellite. In this site, the first photograph of the artificial Sputnik 1, yeah, was taken. By the way, to make this track not solid or like dashed, the guy was waving by the head before the camera. That's if we see, we can see that different empires were building this, and actually that was not empires, that was people, some specific people who actually most of the time done a lot not because of the support of empire, I would say more despite of the support of the empire. They all were astronomers. They have a particular mindset. People are losing this precise ways of thinking, clear way of thinking, have some empirical humidity, understand it's difficult to measure something, and we are some kind of instrument to measure the world, not we are supposed to rule the world. So All this hype about space right now will have definitely opposite effect, because it persuades people that the opinion, the money, the success is important, not the process. And again, we see in observatory different times, difficult times, usually always difficult times, but anyway, observation should be done. They should be going. Observation in astronomy is like a reflection of the state of the society. Right now, recently we've got another three decades fold improvement in the precision. But I'm afraid that this does not touch this kind large cycle of people, because people have this phone, they use GPS, but many of them even not sure that the Earth is not flat. The task of physics, task of astronomy is measure the world we have, not to rule them, but observe.
So we are driving to the city of Zolochiv, which is a small town in western Ukraine, and nearby Zolochiv there is a village, Sasiv, and nearby village of Sasiv there is a location which is called Under the Azimuth, with azimuthum, which has this cosmic connotation. And this is not by accident. This territory is rather high above the sea level, so it's very good for establishing a communication infrastructure. And in the mid-70s, Soviet powers built here a center for transmitting messages, mainly TV and radio and television and phone connection between Moscow and Washington DC. So this was the infrastructure which maintained the state communication between two superpowers, and we are about to see this.
Це ми. Добрий день. То за вами їхати? То туди? Добре. So we are about to visit National Center for Cosmic Research.
Ця антенна зв'язку вмонтована, протестована. Десь під антеною або в антені.
60 kilometers from Lviv, the biggest industrial center in the western part of Ukraine, you see this beautiful landscape. It's mainly agricultural lands, and they have this landscape has these small heights, like almost small mountains, but of course these are not mountains. So it's a kind of plain territory on the edge of the region which we call Podillia, which would be very plainy, kind of the steppe almost region. So it's the end of Precarpathian hilly landscape, and on one of such small hills which are surrounding this beautiful landscape, Soviets built this cosmic infrastructure, and we are about to see and to tell you some story about this. So what you see here, it's an amazing story. So imagine late Soviet Union, early 70s, detente. There is a warming up of relations between the Soviet Union and the United States. Nixon meeting Brezhnev. The relations become more or less okay. Two superpowers try to establish a normal, if it's possible in general, some normal communication. For this communication, they need communication devices. So Moscow decides that they need to build a system which would connect the Intelsat, the cosmic
satellite with Moscow, and then to transmit the signal to the United States, to Washington DC. So in order to kind of send signal from Moscow to satellite, they would need the retransmitter, and this retransmitter was built here in the plains of western Ukraine, on the very edge of the Soviet Union, the western part of the Soviet Union. And for this they needed to build a retransmitting antenna. So this antenna that you see here, it's a typical ship, the sea ship antenna, which was used mainly for research or military purposes. So this kind of antenna was normal for the big sea ship. They call it the ship type antenna, and it was installed here in a total, it's like taking from some military or other special production, brought here and installed on the site as one single antenna. Installed in 1974, so it's completely functional, but just doesn't need to fulfill its functions. So the signals from Moscow would go to this antenna, and then it would send the signal to the Washington DC, and this C-type antenna is built on a beautiful cylinder late Soviet structure, which keeps on the three columns, the three concrete columns, it keeps these 300 tons of infrastructure, communication infrastructure. So the first one has 25 meters in diameter, and it was really Soviet production. And the second one is one of the biggest in Europe. It's 32 meters in diameter. It's a Japanese antenna which was used for the same communication purposes. So to maintain the state, the governmental channel between Moscow and Washington, they built these beautiful pieces here. During detente, during this, what is called it in historiography, razryadka. This antenna was built in 1974, and the second one in 1986 during perestroika. So actually during perestroika, this big antenna, the Japanese one, was responsible for making the international Soviet-American television bridges, as they call them, telemoste. These television bridges were very popular during Gorbachev period, during perestroika, when the Soviet people and the American people could see each other and discuss various matters. So these technologies of the late Soviet Union were not used in the 90s. They deteriorated, and only in 2017 the Ukrainian state decided to reintroduce them back into some other purposes. These antennas became part of the state agency for space research. The specialty of this Japanese big antenna, which is diameter of 32 meters, is that it can receive signals in two diapasons, so which is very special. And now they strive to become the part of the whole European network of these receivers and submitters of information, and to do deep space research. The interesting project took place last year, which may be in some interest for the audience of Ars Electronica. The Kiev company scanned 100,000 pictures of children about peace and other relations about the Earth. These images were scanned, and in a binary type coding system, they were transformed into black and white kind of codes, and then they were transmitted through the specially developed software into the outer space. It took 26 days to transmit these images to outer space, and there was this kind of desire, maybe imagination, that somewhere someone in the space may receive these signals, and maybe they would understand that these are images of small humans from this big planet Earth. This is the beautiful example of late Soviet but also imperial infrastructure, which shows this imagination of the big Soviet imagination about the space communication and extensive move beyond the borders of the big empire. These objects can be considered as monuments from the past, as monuments of the Cold War, as monuments of late socialism, but they also monuments of the human imagination about the space, the imagination of humans which cannot really maintain the earth and the villagers. So whenever you travel, if you travel through Ukraine, take the route from Lviv to Zolochiv. This is the good route which leads you to Kiev, to the capital, and then just take a small journey aside, and you will see these beautiful objects which are symbols of our human desire to get out of our planet Earth in order to colonize and to learn some outer spaces. But this also is a symbol of our inability to maintain our own reality and our own planet and our own locality. So it's a kind of ironical monument, but it's a beautiful monument. Hello, welcome to the Center for Urban History. My name is Bohdan and I do public history projects here. And let me introduce my colleagues. Taras, he is the head of online project which is called Lviv Interactive. He is mainly working in digital humanities and digital history projects. And my other colleague, Stepan, he is an astrophysicist and he works at the astronomical observatory at the National University in Lviv, and also he's a data scholar or data scientist. Okay, so we are going to continue the stories that you've seen on this short video, and we would like to discuss important matters. Of course, this is a very kind of peripheral story for probably even for Europe, but globally nothing special. But we thought that though it's peripheral, it's also very kind of global at the same time, because as Stepan said in this video, the stage of astronomical research and in science in general also reflects the stage of society, so how we actually see the world and how we observe the world. And I think these arguments about observation, they are relevant either to artists or to scientists and to those who want to learn the world. And I will facilitate this meeting. I will ask some questions to my colleagues, and we hope that you will follow us. And if you have questions, you can ask questions on our YouTube channel. So, Taras, tell us a bit more about this media research. Why is this actually important? Studying all these antennas. As for historians, what does it tell us?
Well, hello our audience. Hello our audience here in this room, but also hello to our audience behind this camera. I actually, well, it is important because of imagination, because of abstract thinking, I think, to put it simple, because even now we have this conversation through media, through cameras, through internet, and even now we still need to, while we talk to our audience, we still need to actually imagine our audience behind this camera, behind the screen. So imagination is really important here, and the imagination very often is part of our understanding of the world in general. So we have observation, we have some empirical information, and we also have the part that we don't see like explicitly, that we don't see as a specific object, so we need to understand and to use our abstract thinking and imagination to understand the other part of this world. And very often it is mediatized. Very often we use media to build this communication. And what we've seen on those in those films, we've seen those satellites antennas, and we realized that we have this beautiful landscape with those antennas, which is a local story, but at the same time it is very much global, because those antennas are part of the network, and you cannot talk about communication, especially mediatized communication, without understanding that it is always a network. There is always a connection between certain things, certain actors, certain technology, nature and the landscape and physics to build this communication, to build this conversation. And as we see in those antennas, it is a global conversation because, well, those antennas are only a small part of this. We have some signal sent from Moscow, let's say, to those Lviv antennas, and then from those antennas they are sent to the satellite on the orbit, and then from there we have a signal sent to the United States and vice versa. So we should talk about those antennas having in mind this context of the network and network that builds this communication. While it is why it is important to talk about communication and why it is a really important story for media studies and for history and studies of the history of those empires. In this case, for me personally, I see very much a lot of connections to the studies that in a sense were started by Harold Innis, who is a media theorist. Well, actually he's an economist at first, but then he also switched from his economic studies to study media theory through the infrastructures of communication, infrastructures in general. He was a Canadian, and actually why he wanted to study those communications and empires and how infrastructure facilitates the communication in the empire, because he saw this very specific case study of the British Empire and in Canada as a land and as a territory that was a part of the British Empire at a specific period of time, and it was very distant from the center. And he realized that each empire, and he develops this argument in his research, that each empire, the efficiency of communication defines empire in general. Well, you have, as long as you have efficient communication, then you can maintain development of the empire. And he took the several cases. He took British Empire, of course. He took Egypt, Roman, ancient empires as well. And his argument is that basically space and time is the most important thing in the communicating certain developments in the empire. And those media infrastructures to communication infrastructures that emphasize space, let's say if you use media like stone or like clay in architecture, in sculpture, when you use to communicate certain specific objects, this is the media. This type of media emphasize the space itself, and it makes empire more centralized. More of develops around the specific space, in the hierarchy of the relations within the empire become more centralized. While you use media like paper or papyrus, then you emphasize more on time than on space, and then this communication spreads out to vast territories. And his idea is that what you emphasize more, space or time, defines your way of building empire and defines your way of in general how this empire exists. And this is, I think, quite relevant for example, these studies of this example of satellite antennas. That's why it is important, because it shows how communication was developed for a certain period in this region, how important to have a network. For example, a network of Jesuits in the Catholic Church to establish the network of astronomical observatories, universities, or how important to build a very materialistic network of cables, antennas, and satellites in order to build communication for vast territories. And our way of thinking about empire could be also somehow emphasized by what we see in this kind of medium communication infrastructures.
Yeah, that's. I'd like Stepan to continue this idea that we often see objects of infrastructure like towers. We have some tubes, we have some technology, but we often forget that there is a kind of extensive network of people who stand behind them. And you mentioned this several times, that these were Jesuits who managed to calculate the space actually of our planet, since they had the most widespread network of collaborators, people.
Yes.
So tell us more about the network in science.
Yeah, actually, what I'm doing right now in my research concerning cosmology is actually studying using the method of complex network. By the way, so and formerly I was Linux system and network administrator. So I understand what is network. In my modest person, I somehow focused different specialities. I can say a lot of networks, how to build it from cable and anyway. Let's put. I agree this empires, networks, communication. That's because to build the network you need the communication and etc. 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 And it's worked pretty. If to put the same thing in the context of astronomy, what is astronomy and what we are doing actually. As we know, probably we use right now relativistic theory and general relativity, and what it says in first decent textbook on astronomy, actually we can find the description of the reference frames. Actually, this is the basics of our, let's say, contemporary science. And what is reference phrase? For example, what we have the most prominent, the most precise things of the humanity right now is the celestial reference frame. This is the most precise thing built by the people. It has relative accuracy, relative precision, like one in the, not a millionth, I will billionth. We can measure the angular distances. How it's done? By realization of reference frame. That means we have over the whole globe, we have dispersed number of stations, sites, which observe the same objects on the star. Deep like quasars, for example, and this way we established ICRS, so it's reference frame celestial. And this celestial frame is used to measure the Earth, to build the terrestrial reference frame. And actually, for example, our sites on the building GPS station on the building of our Polytechnic University is kind of one point or one site which builds these terrestrial frames. And it has perfect application because it's like tells us how this core crust is moving, actually how the dynamics of the Earth, actually how it's moving with pretty good precision. For example, we have a laser ranging station in Brюховичи belonging to the, so it should be in this place because it's measured, for example, that we move 11 millimeters per year in the southeastern direction, for example, in this reference rate. So, and again, so observation, and we know from quantum theory that the act of observation actually what is makes the reality. And in this case, we should understand, doesn't matter what we observe, the universe, the Earth, or actually the world in any, let's say, manifestation. We are observers and we take part in this observation. This is a kind of fact which actually make the reality, but not construct by our imagination. Just we like take a glimpse on something in reality, because we can imagine that reality is much more complex than our imagination.
But you say that there is this theoretical physics and then there is this kind of applied physics. So theoretical physics is about imagination.
It's based on the imagination.
Yes, and actually what we see right now, I believe that theoretical physics is in the deepest crisis. Here, if we can say that we have because let's say too much communication, too much imagination, too much about ideas,
And
and no empirical, let's say, humility, so we are not knowing everything, it leads to what we have right now, because it's not my discovery. Many physicists, they are talking what's wrong with physics, and we have in books on that. Let's say billions of money, that's just a kind of power. If you pump the money into the science, and what we see in this movie and what we see in the Soviet Union, that pumping just money in the highly ineffective Soviet science, actually the efficiency of this is infinitely less. And I have a lot of examples, and this zoology site is like, as mathematician says, all small, little of this, all eyewitnesses of infrastructure of connected to the science and military purpose, let's say, in the context. But anyway, what I'm trying to stress, that I agree that the network, communication, infrastructure is important, and just powering. If you build wrong infrastructure, you're doing wrong process. Doesn't matter how many power you put in this, let's say, infrastructure. If it's built on wrong relations, wrong roles, let's say, imposed from top, let's say, any structure is built between top and bottom. The observatory exists because we have bottom some people who want to use power of empire to do the research. You know this common anecdote about physics. What is physics? Is the the way to feed your interest, your curiosity by the state funds, using state funds. That's the truth, actually, because, and in the middle we always have, as media theory says, the context. So if empire is just pumping some power, by the way, in literal, because this old stuff, Soviet stuff, it's eating electricity like mad. All this, by the way, the main, let's say, problem why most of these objects cannot be maintained anyway. They are not sustainable because of the requirement for power, electricity.
The biggest, this antenna in Ukraine was built near Chernobyl atomic
Yeah,
station.
that's real. As you have in Mukachevo, my wife can witness it. You probably heard about this radio location station. That a lot of them. For example, the gold cables in this site of Dunayevsky, which is like 10 times more powerful as Zolochev site. So I've seen. It's like a cable, like a hand made of gold. That's the madness of Soviet Union. They like, as Mendeleev said, they are like were burning banknotes to make a hit.
This is one of the arguments actually in this debate, that basically being kind of local and small, you would never have the possibility to do these large-scale projects. So
but being too big,
yeah, that's why they are maintained by empires. So, like Soviet Union could invest immense funds into often stupid enterprises. Yes, so without any special.
Actually, was killing Soviet Union these stupid projects.
But still, now, for instance, this is interesting. The situation that Ukraine is rather peripheral country in Europe.
I wouldn't say that.
I mean, at least according to economical output, and then you have these immense objects which are remaining from the imperial past, and we still kind of wonder what to do with them.
Yeah. I think it's also the biggest question, because we have this legacy in Ukraine from several empires actually, and And on one hand, we can see it as a kind of asset that we can use, but on the other hand, we do not have this capacity to maintain and handle it.
Frankly saying, no need. Actually, what we are talking, the network, the hierarchy, it builds some structure. Yeah, actually, if you put some energy and right connections, infrastructure, right way of communication, you have some kind of structure. But the same network is destroying this, because second law of thermodynamics is still working. You can build some structure only locally. What we have in our civilization, we borrow some time and a lot of energy, use a lot of energy to structure some local part. Our towns, why we are so urbanized. That's the whole idea of our structuring our civilization, that we borrow, but that doesn't matter. It should fall apart by laws of physics. So this network, what we are saying, which is like making the empire, making the structure, yeah, everything is built about this structure. This same network is ruining this. So I would say that the matter, let's say, if we are talking about physics, about large scale structure, that's my subject, it's like self-organizing itself, self-organizing bottom, and finds this, like say, top in some moment, yeah, some last moment which can, like, not to cause the self-organization, but like work as a trigger. So let's say empire work as a trigger to some productive forces. And actually, and we could not imagine that trigger can hold or sustain something. We have some level, the matter or society, whatever, is ready for self-organization. It's usually very ready, and it's not coming, and it's not concentrating in some point. It's actually the network covering a lot of the, let's say, Ukraine. And if you have the right empire, right grain of salt, it's like coming the crystallization, whatever. And after that, the same network is ruined. And trigger, it's not a reason. There is a lot of reasons, a lot of causes, and empire usually is a trigger. Again, I do not agree about economic of Ukraine, because as far as I understand, population of Ukraine holds around 80 billions dollars in cash at home.
But it's not about economy, it's about
It's
cash,
about economy.
cash in home.
It's about economy. It's about economy, by the way. So if we are talking about productive force, I am saying that Done is a very fine system of powering, let's say. That's the same, by the way, we are not thinking right now, but in Germany, right now we have revolution in power supply, electricity supply, because they have so much alternative sources, so they have the problem, because they start to pay somebody to consume electricity. Because the system is going out of equilibrium.
Yeah.
The system is designed to produce power to the end user, but not designed actually to redistribute this power. And if you are talking Soviet Union, it can be we have fossil fuels, resources, and we top down redistribute the power, completely killing the local productivity. Why Soviet Union was killing writers, poets, and the same creative craft. Actually, it was killing. It was aimed system to like do not allow this creativity go bottom. Let's say creativity to build something. It was because it was contradicting the system. We have resources, but the resources just from fossil. The same if you say semi-regulated. Of course, something should be. Socialism is not completely, but communism is stupid.
It's like theoretical physics.
We can use this to understand some.
You have it in theory, but you
yes, general picture, very general picture. Understand how it's work, but not details.
But to understand how it works, actually, that's why I think physics is actually even more creative and abstract thinking and imaginative like personalities than, for example, people from humanities, because even the Earth, I don't know, Copernicus or Kepler, they could imagine that the Earth, let's say, not flat, right? And
they perfectly knew.
They perfectly knew because they could then measure it. But for the first, they had this question whether it's true or not, and they had to use this imagination, this abstract thinking, in order to ask such a questions. And I think physics in general, while they try to understand the world, they need to use imagination a lot in order to ask such a question, to build those theories that they approve
but it's
or
like,
disapprove.
Again, about triggering. That's very small percent.
So the
if physics will be,
observation.
let's say we need 1% of efforts of resources given to the theoretical physics, because what they do, they expand the mind.
Yes.
The world of our imagination, that's let's say collective mind of this. They, as a mathematicians, that's a kind of art, but physics is about measuring the world, so 99% of physics should be about measuring the world. So if the role of the role of theoretical physics is overwhelming right now, and it leads that physics turns to be like humanities. And actually, this is the kills the idea of physics. And we have a lot of, for example, I can mention the letter of Lawrence Krauss. You should not see this way. That I just measured that. Again, I have the great possibility to, by these hands, we have it's here in Lviv, exemplars of actually original Copernicus book. One from while he was still alive, and several years reprint. And we have this, and I was listening, and I found the same phrase about considering the data about a table with data observation and different. We can assume that quite possible the Earth is rotating about the Sun, but not contrary. And this race is accurately like not wiped, but let's say crossed, boldly crossed. So but it still can be readable by some brown ink, and there is the mark of sensor Rome 6008, the name of this engine. Who, just this phrase. But everything else, we can see that starting from Copernicus, this idea of science is still the same. We imagine, build the model. This model can provide us with some clues how to measure back, and this is like a process.
And then you approve.
Yeah, and approve or disapprove.
Disapprove,
That's
exactly.
what is important right now. What is the problem? There is you are not taking negative results.
Yeah, failures are not
Taking into account. Yeah.
Yes, but the human works is we are positive. We want to have positive things, positive statements, while the nature works we are negative. It means that we are denying this. Denying this doesn't matter. Most of 99 of perfect ideas, perfect, beautiful mathematical ideas, complete nonsense from the physical, because like physical nature is not obligated to follow our imagination. Our imagination is like feeded because it's like larger pool of energy, larger pool of ideas, and those prominent physics, they actually somehow see that or saw that. The same about artists. If you're talking about arts, yeah, here, electronica, because this, including phenomena of human society, of nature, whatever, these are like more energetic, more diverse. And if the nature says that we have restriction, and here is the danger, we should hear this voice. If we cannot, or we believe, the freshest example, if the program of Starlink, you probably, of Elon Musk and what, will be completed, many of the programmers, astronomical programmers, which are like watching for dangerous objects approaching the Earth, will be severely influenced, because the tracks of the satellites can mask those small and very dim objects. We should track the motion. That means that Starlink can put the Earth in danger. That's the simple way.
And how this kind of problems could be resolved? I mean, whether there is a communication, conversation between all the actors that are somehow involved.
Elon Musk does not hear anyone. He don't want.
That's what,
he says, I will paint it in black. This satellite.
That's what Stepan says about the
That's not my voice. That's the voice of astronomical community. Of course, too many flying objects will make the observation from Earth much more difficult. That's like trivial.
I have the last questions for both of you, since we are a bit running out of time, and I'd like you to comment on this paradoxical situation that the contemporary science, which is according to theoretical physicians like Kaku and many other physicists, we are accumulating knowledge. So in the very kind of visible future, we should solve all the issues, since we are accumulating, like in a mathematic progression, knowledge. But then at the same time, we have the situation which I learned last year. There are kind of millions of people on this planet who believe that the Earth is flat, though they use YouTube and GPS and all the other things. So how you would command this kind of discrepancy between the accumulation of knowledge, our kind of extensive view at the universe, and then at the same time our inability to maintain kind of small things like education and humans?
Well, from my perspective, and this is rather perspective of kind of communication or media studies, that basically media shifted this ability to imagine and to think in an abstract way. It's shifted in the sense that let's say when the first Sputnik, where the first satellite was launched on the orbit, it suddenly, well, there were a lot of voices about exploring the space, deep space, and so on. But again, as you said, it was like the first reason, the main reason was to understand the Earth more. And this is actually what was something that was triggered by launching satellites to the space, first human
Not to mention that
because they were able to see Earth, yes, and then this imagination that was about the Earth basically become more terrestrial, and we realized that we were able to see it directly, explicitly, without having like using any abstract thinking or imagination to understand this, that it is not flat. And now, like because of this idea and need somehow to build the instant mediated communication, we want to talk with each other directly, synchronously, like this broadcasting even. All people all over the world could see almost directly what we're talking about. This a bit changed our, shifted our idea of communication, of physical aspects of this communication. So we do not always realize that behind this conversation, behind camera and the screen, there is a network, infrastructural network, that could include even satellites on the orbit, which proves that the Earth is not flat. But while we just talking with each other without realization that there is this media infrastructure between us, we start thinking about, we just hide it, and then we a bit shift our understanding of physics and materiality of this conversation. And while we, as you also mentioned in the film, while we're watching the map on our iPhone or other smartphone, we see this map, but we do not realize that GPS and satellites are involved in this.
And
so
even very deep space objects, including quasars. In our GPS.
Exactly. So our common conversation about knowledge, our communication about knowledge, a bit shifted from the materiality of this conversation, how it builds, but because of the media infrastructure, because of the technology that is a part of a nature and is a part of our world, and that's why, from my perspective, it also like makes this discrepancy visible so much.
So, Stepan, what is your take on this issue?
Actually, that's pretty known issue. It's called gap, technological gap, and everyone is speaking about that, including me. We understand, let's say, about knowledge. Knowledge is not growing. Information is growing. Information is not knowledge. I'm trying to be precise. Sorry, but again, I always like trying to remember myself this phrase of Zurab Mamardashvili, well known by the late Soviet philosopher, who said, "Then we are thinking imprecise, the devil is laughing." Again, knowledge is not growing. There is a very good let's say term in astronomy, so-called S2N, signal to noise, and well known, as I'm speaking as data scientist or astronomer, then you have more data, that means you have more information, but that does not mean that more signal. So if you have more data, that means that this signal to noise is diminishing, because signal or knowledge is not scaled up. Noise is perfectly so-called white noise. It has so-called spectrum, power spectrum in radio, let's say, terminology. So it can be fed from like it have enormous pool of energy, while knowledge is very costly. So everything what we do is we transform information to knowledge on the individual level, on the level of the whole civilization. And let's say the last moment, it was the Enlightenment. Again, what we have, why we have this? Because Enlightenment made the knowledge at that time, and information, both, easily available for masses. I would say also it's called commodity. It's making like available to everyone. For example, right now physics is available much more to everyone because you can bring up these perfect lessons on physics, explanation, our explanation, for example, from YouTube, and it's available. It's the distance to reach this is much more smaller, but that makes it's like unnecessary. Because let's say this is important that everyone is taking own path in life and should make some efforts to gain this knowledge. The efforts is still the same. Information is too proliferate. It's too much communication, too much information, and actually our brains like refuse and takes what is lying on the surface. What we can do, we need to go to some another level of enlightenment, or we will be there as previous civilizations. Again, we know about this Maya. Again, the knowledge, again, is just for those who can afford it. Information is available for masses. That's all. Because the same stuff, the flat earther, they are available. YouTube will recommend you that stuff. By all these celestial reference frames, it's pretty complicated, let it say. But still, it's much more complicated than flat. And human mind, it likes some simple, as you said, theoretical physics, one equation, theory of everything. We just need 1, 2, 3, 5 some axioms and we can derive by our mind everything. No. Just the answer is no. We can postulate some behavior and have prior results. Communists. We know how to do it right. No, comrades. You do not know. We have the proof, but it costs too much. I would say it costs too much, and bring back together again. Remember, then the volume, big data. I'm also certified big data engineer. So then the data are growing. That doesn't mean that our knowledge is growing. Our signal is the same at best. Noise is growing. So right now, some middle person, let's say mediocre person, knows much less than in previous. Let's say 100 years ago. Just one example to finish my speech. Once it was appointed excursion to our observatory in the centrum where we filmed this stuff, and there is no weather. This excursion was very good promoted in radio, television, and it appeared to something like 1,000 people without weather. And by the way, it was organized and promoted by our colleagues from theoretical physics. That's how perception differ. And then, let's say, I was going to. We cannot afford this number of people there to hold the person in any way. So I said, do you see that there is clouds? There is no condition for observation. So please go home. Nevertheless, the biggest part of that went to the telescope and do not trust me and tried to see something through the telescope. I see you could not say. I believe that 100 years ago in the same place, the same excursion, if people were saying, no weather, I will not come.
because other people are, today people are more religious because they believed that through telescope
They can see.
they can see
Even if there is no weather.
and the new God is technology. Because most of the people do not understand technology.
Exactly.
So they are afraid.
They see technology as
So
a
the
magic.
technology is a perfect God.
It's a good point to end up our discussion. I hope you will got our humble opinions about the humility, about the technology as religion, about the mistakes and the need to observe and learn, about the inability, at least now, to change signal into more signal, but
At least keep
at least keep signal
And reduce the
running.
noise.
So thank you for those who were watching us and who being with us live. And this was Center for Urban History, especially for Ars Electronica from Lviv. Goodbye.
Bye.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao. Все, можемо виходити. Данкішон. Телевізійне шоу завершилось.
Але добре брешемо на твої.
Давайте ми